This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. All right, this is Modern Gaming Culture. This is episode 8, Modern Gaming Culture. Last episode was kind of just really highlighting kind of a lot of the dynamics, right, that we really encounter in gaming culture, particularly with stuff like um, kind of just misappropriation, stuff like that. And it really needs to be understood that gaming culture is really like it is like a private um, organization, right? That acts as a public utility, right? Because as opposed to institutions, right, that are more public, right, more publicized, right. You know, there's not a lot of red tape, right, when it comes to interacting with big wigs in gaming culture, right, and so what you'll find is that you'll have a very spontaneous experience, right, encountering gaming culture, aficionados, if you will, and so um, you know, this is something that I think I'm going to really lean into a lot, right? Because I think it's going to really help with my delivery. Because you know, um, I understand that people, right, who really are interested, right, in new material, right, you know, try their best not to really, default to mainstream sources to do so. And so, um, you know, because of that, right, you don't want, even in a climate, right, where you know the majority of people who are really competing, right, in the arena of internet radio, right, um have all the bells and whistles sorted out, right, you know um even still, right, um there still just needs to be a lot of differentiation, right, between shows so that people can really um explore, right, while still participating as an audience member, right. you know we definitely have a lot of infrastructure to set up. That's something I want to talk about for this episode. I've been talking a big game, right, about you know operations and stuff like that, and truth be told, this is pretty much grassroots right now, right. you know we definitely, like, it's kind of like we definitely have a lot to lose, right, investing in this endeavor, right. And so, I don't want to blow smoke up people's asses, right. You know, again, I'm still trying to do something very monumental with the show, right. But at the same time, it really needs to be understood, sort of, what we're up against, right. Because I feel like that's largely the issue, right. Because what you find is that people don't generally know what's around them, right. Um, but also they really don't understand what they're up against as well, right. And so you have this like fusion of incompetence that is really not beneficial to anybody, right. Um, which is why ultimately we just don't entertain a lot of this stupidity that we really encounter in gaming culture, right. We just understand it really is something you can't just explain away, right. And so that needs to really be understood, right. you know um I'm not gonna just come on one day and I'm gonna be in some, you know, giant studio with multiple camera angles, right, etc. Right. Um, this is going to be largely an operation that's going to grow from the support of individuals making the voluntary decision to contribute to this effort, right? And I'm not mincing words with that. That's just the bottom line, right? Platforms, they don't mean anything to me, right? I'm just gonna be very frank. I have nothing to hide. Right? I understand really the situation in which we're, kind of ensconced in, especially in gaming culture, is one where you know really the cards are on the table, and so you know it's not gonna be something where I'm just gonna be like, we're winning. You know, um, you know, really have to um, just be frank, right? Um, eventually the goal is right to basically build a platform, right, um, to host uh, content, right, curated, right, and the kind of content hosts, right, are going to be curated, right, probably by me and then you know a team of people that I really consult, right. So um, you know, just to really prepare people, right, because by hook or by crook, that's gonna happen. And so, I mean, I don't really care, right? Like views don't matter to me. It doesn't matter, right? There's a million ways to get, reach, right? And so that's not really what's important. What's important is the material, right? Getting it out there, formalizing it, right? Presenting it, and then immortalizing it. That's all that matters. Nothing else matters except for that, right? It's a show about gaming culture, right? So, as opposed to shows, right, where they're really trying to, play an angle, etc., right? Um, this is a show where we're really trying to do a lot of, clinical stuff regarding gaming culture, right? Because people don't really realize how much game design really bleeds in to a lot of aspects of society, right? Where, generally you would take a more competitive stance against people, right? In an arena that's very clearly, obviously, a competitive arena, um, then you would normally let your guard down otherwise. And you have to understand that, never the twain shall meet, right? And so, you know, um, this is stuff where you just have to really, alleviate a lot of that confusion, right? Um, things can get very convoluted, right, when you're really analyzing them, right? And so, in light of that, it's really just a matter of, taking it apart and shedding light on the situation, right? This episode, I'm taking a very, steady, relaxed, focused direction. I'm I'm making a lot of changes in my environment. And so, you know, I don't have any reason to really, unpack or, go off on tangents or stuff like that, right? Something that we really preach, right, is, you have to have clear thoughts, right? Um, of course, when tensions are high, of course, you should definitely not, you know, there's this kind of dynamic, right, of people who are really trying to, fake it till you make it ultimately, right? No, that's not how things should work. Right? That's not how anything works except death. And so, and not even death works like that, right? Because we never know when our time is up, right? And I think that's as heavy as I think I'm going to get this episode, right? I'm definitely being very blatant, right? Which can be pretty heavy for some people. I think most people generally respond well to a very blatant and out there message. So, I don't really expect to scare people off. But, when you get into discussions like that, people can get pretty spooked. You know, um, that's not something that really concerns me, right? Because I'm the youngest in my family, and so I generally just tend to take a very cocky attitude when it comes to things. Um, so yeah, that's kind of if you're wondering about that, that's generally just my disposition. Is just very you know relaxed, laid back, very cocky. Right? So um, this is kind of like a season of a lot of changes, right? Society's really been structured in a way so as that this season brings a lot of changes and a lot of structural analysis, right? Um, and so with it comes a lot of very hectic times, right? And you don't need to be perturbed by this stuff, right? These things come and go, and you just have to get through them, and keep your wits about you, basically, right? So you know that's something really been doing, right? For the last little while, right? Um, I've been doing a lot of looking through my um Pokemon trading card game collection, right? So I can start putting stuff into bulk and then start moving some stuff into standard binders. Um, might have to get a new binder too. I think I'm gonna just make a Scarlet Violet binder. I'm leaning more way towards that, to be honest. Um, because it seems like I don't really want to make a Scarlet and Violet binder. I have a binders behind me. If you kind of see them, can't really get out of the way. But yeah, there's like a blue binder there, and then there's a binder underneath it. It's a black binder, and yeah, those are binders for eras. I have Sword and Shield there. I have Sun and Moon. Those are times where I was very active, and so it was very hectic, and so I pretty much the bandage is there, and now I just move stuff in and out of it, right, when I don't need it, right. Um, and so, but it seems like I'm not really leaning towards that. I already have that white binder. Yeah, that's pretty clear. That's the binder I'm using for Scarlet and Violet. Um, but it seems like a lot of the stuff for Scarlet and Violet I have is not even in that binder, and so I think that's just gonna stay as like a binder that just has staples. That's just a term that we use in trading card game lingo to refer to like cards that you can use in a lot of different decks. Um, so I think that's probably just Scarlet's gonna be, and Scarlet and Violet is still gonna be legal for at least I think 2 or 3 years. So yeah, don't really have to touch that binder except just taking stuff out and putting it into bulk. But yeah, I got a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna be doing a lot of deck building, so it's gonna be very interesting. We got some events coming up, which is pretty cool. And so, you know, it's doing inventory, right? These are just important things. When you're in gaming culture, it's just, taking inventory, right? Can be very startling, right? Especially when you have a very, very large inventory, right? And a lot of stuff is, moving and you're not, keeping track of it, right? And so, it's pretty interesting dynamic. Um, you know, um, it's not. I don't think that it's necessarily what scares people away from really a lot of these issues that we really face in gamer culture, right? Hoarding is a huge issue in gamer culture. This is sort of like spilling the tea a little bit, but yeah. Um, for people who really don't follow gaming culture that much, right? Like, I don't know if you live with someone who's a hoarder, someone who's a hoarder, right? And you have to really deal with their bullshit, right? Um, that can be hard, right? But if you really step out and you find that there are a lot of people who are hoarding in more destructive ways than somebody who's really just causing a big issue in your microcosm, right? Um, yeah, hoarder is actually the biggest issue, um, because people look at it like, oh, it's people who are just buying up product, it's not the issue. It's not the product being sold. Right? That's a very communist take to really look at it like, oh, it's because the issue is that people are buying up all the product, right? It's not necessarily the product being bought up, right? It's the fact that they buy the product and the product is meant to be circulated, right? Um, and so, you buy the product, you literally take everything you want from it, and then 99% of it, well, practically 100%, because the stuff you're looking for doesn't really matter. It's just collector's items, right? And so, they're just luxury items, right? And so, you know, um, well, frankly, it doesn't matter, right? If you take that one item out, right? It's still it's the product, right? The packaging, right, which can be used to store stuff, right? You can see some of the packaging that I'm using to store some stuff back there, right? And then everything else, right? You're literally just taking stuff that people aren't even looking for, right? And then you're just taking the product, right? So the economy remains good, right? But the reselling economy is where the issue really becomes, and then that's where basically everyone is, right? If you really understand the economy in which Pokemon is really trying to set up, right? It's not supposed to be some oligarchy, right? Where you have people at the top, and then everyone else pretty much suffers, right? It's something where it's supposed to be, you know, a very, heavily circulating economy, right? So, for people who, may want to get into Pokemon, for example, right? And they're wondering a lot of the logistics, right? Um, yeah, that's a big issue. I think it's the biggest issue in my opinion. And so, you know, this is something where it really scares a lot of people away, particularly doing inventory, right? When you understand, you know, as this issue gets worse, right? Because ultimately the issue is that basically Pokemon needs to um, maintain their profit margins, and so they basically improve the product, right? Improve the product, so the price of the product increases, right? And that means demand will go up, right? And so ultimately, right, they're really just cutting their losses because what's happening is that they're basically selling the same amount of product, right? It's just now they're selling it at a higher price, right? But the issue with the resale market isn't changing because the resale market isn't getting better. And so people are being turned away from your game, right? So Pokemon really faces this issue where, um, you know, um, they can't really keep up with this hoarding, right? And it gets people thinking, well, how about you just give away product for free? Again, that's a very communist take, right? That's more socialist than communist, but ultimately, again, it's a very ideological, unexamined, um, kind of like a one of the big picture and doing it all at once sort of stance, right, on the economy, right? When it's really just a matter of basically um, overwhelming this very, very small population of people, right, with people who actually want to play, etc. So those people don't have a market, right? I was watching an episode of Robot Chicken, right, recently, where they had this kind of dynamic, right, where there was this guy who was retiring, right, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna be rich," right, and everyone's asking him, "Oh, what is it?" right, and he's like, "Yeah, I have a collection of Beanie Babies," right, and then his wife tells him, "Yeah, Beanie Babies aren't worth anything anymore," right. That's just a sad reality, and it's not really sad. It's really just the reality, right? Because you find with a lot of these people, these are just not really. Again, these are like the scum of society. These are not necessarily people that really people even really care about in general, whether it be for any reason whatsoever. These are just people who are really just running this, um, kind of like spiritual haze of an ideology, right? Um, to sort of satisfy this, very hedonistic urge for security, ultimately, right? And they're just gonna find out the hard way that basically they are, dupes, right? Not even really useful dupes, just dupes, and they've been duped. There's nothing really else, right? What I always advocate is that you know, um, where the real money is in Pokemon is in bulk, right? You want to get as much as you can for as little as you can. That's really all you want to do, right? Um, and that's just what I'm going to continue to advocate because I know, you know, basically the alternative to that is basically looking for stuff that's going to be worthless, right? And so, if you want some investment advice, there you got it, right? Again, this is not a episode I really expect for a lot of people to reach, and if it reaches people, great, right? But again, right, that's not what this is about, right? We're trying to, put together, right, um, you know, and publish, right, and immortalize our work, right? So, you know, um, seems like really that's really the direction the show's going. So I can really continue on that thread, Um, you know, again, right, it's something where people don't really understand this sort of economy, right? Particularly gaming culture. So you have a lot of issues with people who want to help, right? They're not really equipped to really examine the situation, right? From a long view perspective, right? And so what they do is they really just sort of follow the leader, right? Um, and it's good because ultimately, right, it's being on the right track, right? Um, you know, because largely when, these people's investments, vanish, right? Um, you know, you're gonna need a society to, you know, um build back better, right, in the aftermath. And so that's being on the right track, right? And you can still be useful in that regard, right? You're not gonna do damage that way. Right? There's this real dynamic that really needs to be addressed of, counterproductive, help, right? And so that's not something that would be counterproductive, right? Although, again, there's still things we need. Again, you're still on the right track, right? You know, talk about a lot how not trying to lean into people, who I'm trying to reach, right? I understand they need like a companion, etc. And that's kind of the role I try to fill, right? Um, this is something that's not going to be just, oh, all of a sudden, um, you know, production value is going down, so we need to flush out, you know, 30, 40 grand so we can set Rotimi up, right? So we can get more reach, That's not gonna happen. You know, this is you're gonna get as much as you put in from this, right? You know, I'm so busy. I got things I gotta do, places I gotta be, right? And so if you think somehow I'm just gonna come on every week and I'm just going to give you the good news, and then you're just gonna watch, and then eventually, I'm gonna be looking like Alex Jones or something like that, right? You know, I got some bad news for you. That's not gonna happen, right? Don't get your hopes up, all right? So come here, listen to what I gotta say, you know, test it out, and see what you get back, right? That is the this truth discovery methodology, right? And so I'm not gonna hear, and I'm not gonna sell people smoke oil, snake oil. I'm not gonna tell people, everything's gonna be okay, because it's not. And I'm definitely not gonna tell people all you gotta do is sit back and wait, and the white hats are coming, because they're not. They got better things to do. Right? I can tell you something too about that too, right? We launched our Pokemon event, right, right around rotation this year, right? So February, and it was a hot item, right? And we are maxing out our spots. We're giving away a lot of products, right? And once people's intellectual curiosity wore off, they were back doing whatever the fuck they were doing before. And so, you know, it's not something where people, just sort of sit around, right, and just socialize, right? People have needs they want met. Once those needs are met, they move on. That's the bottom line, right? So White Hats are not coming, right? And seasons change, right? Right now they have this new game that just came out, um, from Riot, and people are coming out of the woodwork, buying out products, right? Riftbound's going to turn out to just be a niche game. That's what it's all for. It's not supposed to be something to compete against anything, right? So, that's a pretty good nugget of wisdom, for people who really stuck on this long. So, you can take that with you. Right? Riftbound's not going to take off. Let me just say it one more time. Riftbound is not going to take off. Right? That's not what it's supposed to do, and that's not what it's going to do. Nothing works like that anywhere in the known universe. It's not going to take off, right? Um, so goes back to inventory, right? I just did some inventory, seen stuff I want, went to the place that I wanted to get it. If they had it, I got it. They didn't have it, I didn't get it. Now I wait for my product to come in, and then I can restock. That's what we do. That's what we do. There's no tricks. There's no, sleight of hand, right? That is what we do. And then you come and we give you what you want. That is that's what we do, right? There's no tricks, there's nothing else, right? So whatever you bring, we're just like, oh really? All right. No. Then you're like, all right, well, I want this. How much is it? $300. All right, there you go. Have a good day. That's what we do. And then, we gotta restock. It's not magic, right? We're not acting. That's what we do. All right. Um, so I think I'm just gonna leave it there. For former part of this episode, to conclude, you know, if you like, if you like Pokemon, Pokemon has a website, Pokemon Center. Sometimes there's a huge volume of people using the website, so you might have to wait to get on. Um, they're generally pretty well stocked. There's no sign up required, nothing like that. All you gotta do is just give them your address, and you just get whatever you want. They'll ship it wherever you want them to ship it in a timely fashion, and you'll receive your products. So thank you for listening. It's been Mario Gamer Culture, and I'll see you.